So we decided to teach a class that would basically bring political science to the high school level. So in my own history, I only took government in school, and we never really got into the data and statistics that you end up learning when you take government classes and political science classes in college. So we wanted to bring that to the high school level. In doing so, we're using the Democracy Index, which is published by The Economist. And instead of having students focus on learning about one individual government, we're giving them the skills and the vocabulary needed to be able to analyze all of the governments that could ever exist in the world. So there's 170 plus countries, and so instead of learning and memorizing facts about 170 plus countries, we're hoping to build their vocabulary and their sort of ability to analyze and read the news and what they see online so that they can understand government structures and democracy and authoritarianism by themselves.
We've talked about the two main concepts we talked about are, political participation and civil liberties. And, I remember back at the beginning of the class when Gabby first introduced this list of democratic characteristics, I feel like people kind of thought the civil liberty stuff is more important. So, that people have their rights and are protected, and obviously that's very important. But I sort of made the argument that political participation and having robust democracy in that sense is just as important, because if you don't, civil liberties can get eroded. So it's really, the two things are very much connected in that way. And I think with Gabby's framework, she's always asking the students to look at interactions in the system. And I think that sort of lends itself to that perspective as well.
I would say the most interesting would probably be when we learned about the Russian government and seeing how different and how similar it is to the U.S. government and stuff. The cases about the people who spoke up about negatively about the president were mysteriously killed or dead.
The statistics part has been interesting. I wasn't expecting it to include as much graphing, but then it's mostly graphic. So I guess somehow in my head I hadn't thought that was what it would be, but I think it is very useful because before, if I was reading a study, I would just kind of skip over the graphs a lot of the time because it'd be well, I don't really know what that's saying. But I think now I know about all these different types of graphs, and I think that will definitely be helpful going forward.
The different types of charts, and I've never really been good at using Google Sheets, so it helped me with that, and I found that interesting how they can connect without having a clear connection. It's they both help each other, I guess.
They just finished a project where they were analyzing, in my class, they did individual research on the civil liberties of a country of their choice. So a lot of students picked either countries where their family may come from or countries where they recently visited on vacation. So there was a lot of personal connections there. And they looked at the civil liberties of the country, specifically as it relates to the civil liberties score that they got from the Democracy Index, and found examples of where that score did or didn't match what they saw in the news.
The annotations and the notes, and then the mini presentation on whatever country we chose, which I chose India, and our mini presentation. And then for the statistics, I would say probably the projects, because I like how it shows the connection between the two classes.
I've liked the projects we've done in statistics. I don't know if that counts as an activity, but
Yeah.
I think, it kind of making the graphs yourself and using the government data and sort of looking at the graphs, then once you're done, it does very much help sort of make it all feel this is why this is useful. And you can see why actual political scientists, you do that stuff with statistics.
So I chose India because that's where my family's from, and I just found it like interesting because my grandpa like used to live there, so I just like felt a connection to it.
Have you learned anything really interesting so far in doing your research and everything?
Um, I guess that like is more similar to America or to the U.S. government than I thought, and like how they're both like democracies, and I also was like shocked to find out about the like police brutality in India. There are like severe like punishments.
Mhm.
The first one I'm researching is East Asia and like Southeast Asia, sort of that area, because um, I had done a previous test about Japan, and so it's, one of the regions had to be the region that that country was in. So, Japan is in that area of the world. And then the other region, I'm doing the Middle East, North Africa region. And I felt like those would be good ones to compare because they're not like completely different. Like they're, similar in some ways, more similar than if I were to compare, the Asian region to like the Americas. That might be, further apart. But I feel like this way I'd be more similar, which could allow for like more like specific comparisons and the regional differences. Well, I'm still in the very early stages of working on the project, but I think it was interesting just to look at what countries were considered to make up those regions. Because, East Asia, it's the main ones you think of, I think, are China, Japan, the Koreas, but it can also be considered, like based on cultural ties and influence to include Mongolia and Vietnam. And of course, Taiwan's in there, which, shares a lot of culture with China because they're both Chinese. And I think just looking at that was interesting. And the same thing with the Middle East and North Africa, because with the Middle East, you mostly hear about just like a couple countries, but it's like a big region. There's a lot of different places like Bahrain and Qatar. So I'm excited to learn more about those countries.
What was it like preparing for this class? Did you and Rachel work together a lot or kind of individually and bring it all together?
Yeah, we charted out how my class would look and how hers would look and where the overlap would be. So we set up right away that all of the projects would be combined. So each unit is based off of one section of the Democracy Index, and for each unit we have one project. I'll teach the vocabulary and the applications to countries, and she'll teach the data analysis. And then we will spend time in both of our classes to combine the analysis so that they're able to practice talking about government and also practice using data analysis.
I've taught 2 lessons so far in the class. The first one was about political participation in the U.S. Gabby had introduced the topic generally, and then I gave a slideshow talking about, the prevalence of the different forms of political participation. So what's voter turnout like? How many people protest? And so we went through that. We talked about canvassing and, other ways people get involved with campaigns. And at the end of the presentation, I had an activity where I asked them to watch a video, sort of a political sketch, and then we talked about, is political comedy a form of political participation? And most of them said yes, which I would agree with. And we had a little discussion about then who counts as politically involved? Is someone who tweets about politics politically involved, even if they say didn't vote in the last election? And we talked about some different concepts like, tweeting is a small thing, but it's still a thing that someone does. And some of the students talked about whether they consider themselves politically active. So I think that was a very good experience for me. I feel like that discussion was worth having, and I feel like I did a good job with the presentation. And then The other lesson I taught was I introduced the government structure of Russia. That was more straightforward. I just went through the diagram. We took the different positions, what their legislative branch looks like, what their judicial branch looks like. With Russia, it's the first authoritarian country we've talked about, and it was, I think, very helpful for them as well. It's like have the contrast because we're talking about democracy, like what is democracy a lot of the time, but it also means we're talking about the opposite.
My sister is like a statistics major, and it seems like really interesting and fun, which it is, and I really enjoy both classes. And both of the teachers are really amazing, just like all the teachers here. But they do a really good job of teaching it, but also making it as fun as possible and interactive.
You want to go into government in some way, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking currently, yes.
Okay. And is that why you head up Model UN?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what started me down the path, I might say, is when I did Model UN for the first time.